I drove to my father's house without warning, no call, no text. Just instinct pulling me there at nearly 10 at night. I knocked. He opened the door. For half a second his face wasn't surprised. It was ready. His hands closed around my shoulders. He turned me, kicked the door shut behind us. "Listen to me," he whispered. "Get under the kitchen table right now. Don't make a sound." I'd never seen that look on his face before. Fear, and something colder underneath it. I didn't ask why. I just crawled. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment and tell me, what are you hoping to take from this story today? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read. Just a note. Some details have been adjusted for storytelling, but the lesson and the emotions at the heart of this are real. Dad pulled me inside before I could say hello. His hand closed around my shoulder, not rough, but absolute, and he kicked the door shut behind me. I opened my mouth to ask what was wrong, but he shook his head once, sharp and fast, the way you'd stop a child from stepping into traffic. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and tight. "Get under the kitchen table. Right now. Don't make a sound." I stared at him. Vernon Brennan, 64 years old, retired mechanic. My father, who had never in my 33 years raised his voice at me to do something without explanation, stood there with a look I'd never seen before. Fear. And something harder underneath it, something cold and deliberate. I didn't ask why. My body obeyed before my brain could process. The kitchen table was massive, an antique walnut monstrosity he'd bought at an estate sale in 1995. It had 4 thick carved legs, and enough space underneath for a grown woman to crouch if she pulled her knees to her chest, and didn't mind the smell of floor polish. I crawled under. The wood was cool against my palms. I heard Dad walk to the living room, heard the creak of the sofa as he sat down, heard him pick up the remote and turn on the television, some news channel volume low. Then nothing. I counted 3 minutes of silence. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tried to make sense of what was happening. I'd driven over unannounced because I wanted to talk to Dad about something. What was it? It seemed so small now, crouched under this table, that I couldn't even remember. I worked as head of accounting at a mid-sized department store chain in White Plains. I was good at my job. I had a decent salary, a husband, a mortgage. I thought I knew exactly who I was. Then the doorbell rang. I froze. From where I crouched, I could see the edge of the kitchen doorway, a sliver of the hall beyond. I heard Dad get up, heard his footsteps steady, unhurried, cross the living room. The door opened. "Vernon," a voice said, a man's voice, friendly, warm. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Dad said. "Come in." Footsteps entered the house. I knew those footsteps. I had heard them every single day for 12 years. But to understand why I was hiding under that table, why my father had looked at me with eyes that held both fear and something like grim determination, you need to know what this house meant. Dad bought it in 1987, a 3-bedroom suburban place in White Plains, with a garage big enough for his tools and a backyard that got good sun in the summer. He was 26, then newly married, working 60-hour weeks as a mechanic at a shop on Central Avenue. The mortgage took 30 years to pay off. 30 years of every spare dollar, every overtime shift, every skipped vacation. By the time he handed me the paid-off deed to look at on my 28th birthday, the paper was soft at the edges from being unfolded and refolded so many times. This house smelled like engine oil and fresh-cut grass. It had cracked linoleum in the kitchen and a bathroom sink that dripped no matter how many times he tried to fix it. The walls were the same off-white they'd been painted in 1987. It wasn't much, but it was his. The only thing he owned outright in this world. And someone had been trying to take it for 12 years. I didn't know that yet. From under the table, I heard the two of them walk into the kitchen. Chairs scraped. They sat down at the table right above me. I could see their shoes. Dad's old work boots, scuffed and salt-stained from winter, and the other pair, brown leather dress shoes I'd seen lined up by our bedroom door every morning since 2013. "Coffee?" Dad asked. "Sure," my husband said. "Thanks, Vernon. I need you to understand I trusted my father more than I trusted my own instincts that day." Desmond Hewitt, 34 years old when I met him at a town gala in 2011. Charming, attentive. He worked in sales at a car dealership and had an easy smile that made people want to buy things from him. We married in 2013. I loved him. Or I thought I did. I wasn't sure anymore what the difference was. I heard the coffee maker hiss and bubble. I heard Dad set 2 mugs on the table. I heard Desmond take a sip and make a small appreciative sound. So, Desmond said, his voice casual like they were about to talk about the weather. I wanted to ask you something. Go ahead, Dad said. A pause. I pressed my back against the table leg, trying to breathe quietly. The smell of floor wax was making me dizzy. Or maybe it was the fear. It's about the house, Desmond said. My father said nothing. I've been thinking. Desmond continued, his tone still light, still friendly. You're getting older. 64 now, right? This place is a lot to manage on your own. 3 bedrooms, the yard, all that maintenance. And with property values in White Plains going up the way they have. What are you asking? Dad's voice was flat. Desmond laughed, a small, uncomfortable sound. I'm asking if you've thought about selling, or, and hear me out, if you'd consider signing the deed over to me and Leora. For estate planning purposes. It would make things cleaner down the line, avoid probate. Keep it in the family. I felt something cold slide down my spine. Keep it in the family, Dad repeated slowly. Exactly, Desmond said. You'd still live here, of course. Nothing would change. It's just paperwork. Just paperwork, Desmond said above me. I pressed my spine against the table leg and tried to slow my breathing. My husband, the man I'd shared a bed with for 12 years, was sitting 3 feet above my head, asking my father to sign away his house. But to understand why Dad hid me under this table, you need to know how I met the man whose footsteps I'd just heard. More importantly, you need to know how he chose me. December 2011, the White Plains Town Hall Christmas Gala. I was 20 years old, fresh out of college with an accounting degree and a job offer from a department store chain. I wore a green dress my mother had bought me before she died, too formal for my age, but I didn't know that yet. I stood by the punch table, trying to look like I belonged at an adult party. Desmond Hewitt walked up to me at exactly 9:47 p.m. I remember the time because I'd checked my watch 3 times in the previous 10 minutes, debating whether I could leave without seeming rude. He appeared with a whiskey glass in one hand and a smile that looked spontaneous, easy, like he'd just noticed me and couldn't help himself. You look like you're calculating the optimal exit time, he said. I laughed. It was exactly the right thing to say to an accountant who was bad at parties. We talked for an hour. He asked about my job, my degree, whether I liked working with numbers. He made accounting sound interesting. He made me feel interesting. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn until I was 30 years old and hiding under a kitchen table, was that Desmond had been watching me for 40 minutes before he approached, timing his entrance, waiting until I was alone, uncertain, ready to be rescued. He was 34 then. He worked in sales at a used car dealership. He had an easy charm that made people want to trust him, want to buy things from him, want to believe whatever he said. He'd obtained a list 3 weeks before that gala. A list of families who owned original land parcels in White Plains and the surrounding area. Families with clear titles and no outstanding debts. He'd cross-referenced that list with families who had only children, preferably daughters, and parents old enough to be thinking about retirement, but young enough to still have equity. My father, Vernon Brennan, 64 now, but 50, then had bought his house in 1987, paid it off in full by 2007. Only child me. Occupation accountant, which meant I had access to financial information and trusted numbers more than instinct. I had the highest safety index on his list. I need you to understand something. I thought I was choosing him. I didn't know I'd been chosen first. We dated for 2 years. Normal dating. Coffee shops and movies and dinners where he paid, and I offered to split, and he insisted with a smile that made me feel taken care of. He met my father in spring 2012. They got along. Desmond asked questions about cars, about engines, about the work Dad used to do. Dad answered cautious but polite. Looking back now, I wonder if Dad sensed something even then. Some instinct honed over 40 years of being the guy people tried to rip off when their transmission failed. But he said nothing. What could he say? My boyfriend was polite, employed. He showed up on time and didn't drink too much and shook hands firmly. Summer 2013. That's when Desmond made his move. We'd driven upstate for a weekend trip. His car, a 10-year-old Honda Accord he'd bought at auction, broke down on a back road 20 miles from the nearest town. We had to stay at a roadside motel. One room, one bed. I was 22 and in love, and it felt like an adventure. The next morning, Desmond drove straight to my father's house. I stayed in the car confused while Desmond went inside. Through the kitchen window, I watched him sit down at the table, the same table I was now hiding under, and say something that made my father's face go very still. Later, Dad called me inside. "Your boyfriend has something to say to you," Dad said. His voice was flat. Desmond stood up. He looked serious, almost nervous. He took my hand. "I told your father the truth," he said, "that we were together last night. And I told him I want to do this right. I want to marry you." I felt my face go hot. I looked at Dad, expecting what anger, disappointment. He just looked tired. "If that's what you want," Dad said to me, not to Desmond. His eyes held mine for a long moment. "Is it?" I said yes. Of course I said yes. Desmond had just confessed to my father and asked to marry me. It was old-fashioned, honorable, romantic in a way I didn't think men were anymore. 22-year-old me thought this was the most romantic thing that had ever happened. 33-year-old me, crouching under a table, finally understood it was the opening move in a 12-year con. The car hadn't broken down by accident. Desmond had loosened a belt connection the night before. He'd engineered the whole situation, the breakdown, the motel, the confession to back my father into a corner, to weaponize Dad's honor code. A mechanic from a generation that believed if you compromised someone's daughter, you married her. Desmond knew exactly what he was doing. We married 6 weeks later. Small ceremony at the courthouse. Dad wore his good suit, the navy one he'd bought for my mother's funeral. He walked me down the aisle, which was really just the length of a judge's office, and shook Desmond's hand when the judge pronounced us married. I have a photo from that day. In it, Dad is smiling. I used to look at that photo and feel warm, feel like everything had turned out right. Now I see it differently. That smile wasn't happiness. It was the expression of someone who just lost a game he hadn't known he was playing, who sensed manipulation but was bound by his own code to accept the outcome. He knew something was wrong from the very beginning. He just couldn't prove it yet. And he spent the next 12 years watching, waiting, gathering evidence I was too in love, and then too tired, too worn down, too busy making excuses to see. Above me in the present, Desmond's voice continued. "It would make things so much simpler," he was saying to Dad. "Just sign the deed over. You'd still live here. Nothing changes. It's just a formality." I heard my father set down his coffee mug. The sound was very deliberate. "Let me think about it," Dad said. "Let me think about it," Dad said above me, his voice giving nothing away. I heard Desmond shift in his chair. A pause, then, "Of course. No rush. Just makes sense to keep things simple, right?" 12 years, I thought, pressed against the table leg. 12 years of evidence I'd missed. It started within a year of the wedding. Desmond began visiting my father alone. Weekday afternoons, 2 or 3 times a month. He'd text me at work.